Welcome to everyone to our session. I'm Angela Stent, Director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies, and we're really delighted to have Dr. Sergey Markedonov with us today from Moscow to discuss the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. As you all know, a ceasefire has been signed. Russian peacekeeping troops are now in the region, and there's obviously interesting questions about what Turkey's role will be going forward. And I think we couldn't have a better person to discuss this with us than Dr. Markedonov. He's a leading researcher at the Institute of International Studies at MGIMO University in Moscow. He's an expert at the Russian International Affairs Council and the Gorchakov Public Diplomacy Fund. He's been an associate professor at the Russian State University for the Humanities, and he was earlier on a visiting fellow at CSIS here in Washington, D.C. He has widely published on the Caucasus, again, known as one of the leading experts on the region. So we're delighted to have you. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Angela, thank you so much. I am grateful to you personally and your center for this invitation. It's a privilege for me. And since I suppose 2007 or 2008, we put a good tradition of my presentations at your center at Georgetown University. And now I am more than happy to continue this tradition. And today we are going to discuss very topical, very hot issue. When we plan to put our presentation, we entitle it as escalation and risks of new confrontation. Now, some changes have taken place, and we can speak about attempts to de-escalate. It's not the process of de-escalation, like something inevitable or consistent. It's necessary to understand where we are and what perspectives will we have from today's point. This September, we were witnesses of new outbreak of violence between Azeris and Armenians over Nagorno-Karabakh disputed area. This issue is not a novelty in foreign policy. And we discussed this conflict for at least 3 decades. And we have seen the transformation of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict from intercommunal, inter-republican within one single state, USSR, and then interstate conflict after collapse of the USSR. And now we see its transformation from ethnopolitical to geopolitical conflict. And a lot of issues were raised by this outbreak of escalation. First of all, I am going to start with basic features of changes appeared for these last months, and then I am going to characterize newly established situation. What's the difference? And of course, I suppose to pay attention to the role of different actors, be it Russia, Turkey, of course, Iran, United States, France, and then I would be open for the questions. What we see now, first of all, we see, I suppose, the dramatic, for somebody tragic change of the status quo, break in status quo in the conflict. It existed prior to this new outbreak of violence for 26 years. When ceasefire agreement on May 12, 1914 was introduced. And we have seen since that time 2 baskets of the problems. I wish to sharpen this point especially because the 2 conflicting parties usually appeal to one basket, ignoring the second one. The first basket is a self-determination of the Armenian community of Nagorno-Karabakh. It's necessary to stress it because it's the core prerequisite of the conflict. You know that USSR looked like Matryoshka doll. Union republics containing autonomous regions or autonomous republics. And as a result of the dissolution of the single state, ethnopolitical problem became more topical and acute. And the problem was, I suppose, not collapse as a proper process, but some basic features of it. The problem of the USSR collapse that it was realized not due to accordance of strict legal norms. It was based on political reasonability. This is why no criteria of recognition, and uti possidetis juris principle was based as a fundamental one. And as a result, many autonomous regions didn't agree with this principle that newly established states should strongly correspond to the lines of inter-republican borders established in the USSR times. As a result, we got phenomenon of Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria, de facto states on the ruins of the once single state. But there is a second basket of the problem. Azerbaijani side calls occupation, and it was real occupation of neighboring areas surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh. It was explained by the Armenian side by military needs and security also. But fact is fact. It was occupation. Those territories were not part of the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region. They didn't appeal to miatsum or unification with Mother Armenia, and they were inhabited predominantly by Azeris. This is why the two baskets of the problem were on the table for negotiations, and the two principles, principle of the self-determination, opposed the principle of territorial integrity. And international law treats them like equal, but in practice, it's so very hard to find optimum between them. Of course, as a result of this first wave of the conflict, we got Nagorno-Karabakh Republic as an unrecognized entity supported by Armenia militarily in terms of security and so on. But at the same time, this entity was never recognized even by Armenia or some other countries. In this context, it's different seriously from Abkhazia or South Ossetia, having rather limited but nevertheless recognition. We saw the most serious outbreaks of the violence in 2016. Some lesser but important violations took place in 2015 December, for example, or 2008 March. But 2016 was rather unique among all violations of ceasefire of 1994 because some plots of the lands were lost for Armenians. This fact was recognized in 2016 by then President of Armenia, Sergey Markedonov. It was an attempt to reconsider status quo, but it was not a principal violation of the status quo. Infrastructure of Nagorno-Karabakh unrecognized republic was kept. Most of occupied areas were also stayed under the Armenian control. What we see now, we see return of all districts around Nagorno-Karabakh. We know about negotiations process. Informally, not formally, but informally, idea on 5+2 return was discussed by the mediators and by the sides of the conflict. That 5 sides which separated Nagorno-Karabakh from proper Azerbaijan should be given to Baku. As for 2 other, Lachin and Kilbajar, ensuring corridor between Mother Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh would be returned a little bit later. Now this formula 5+2 is dead because the new ceasefire agreement required to give back even Lachin and Kelbajar districts. By the way, those districts were not arenas of military confrontation now, unlike Zangilan, Kubatli, or Jebrail, regions separating Nagorno-Karabakh from Iran, from Iranian side, southern flank of this territory. Nevertheless, the two regions which were more or less incorporated in Nagorno-Karabakh, unlike 5 other areas which looked like abandoned places, empty spaces, something similar, also should be given back. And the most important thing in the changing status quo, the territorial configuration of Nagorno-Karabakh and recognized republic properly. Nagorno-Karabakh lost some its own territories belonging in the Soviet time to the autonomous region. I mean here Gadrut district in the southern part, as well as Shusha. Shusha has a significance in terms of symbolism, history for Azerbaijani because it was a capital city of Karabakh Khanate prior its integration to the Russian Empire in the early 19th century. And prior to the USSR collapse, Shusha was kind of avant-post of the Azerbaijani influence in Karabakh. Baku was losing its influence between 1988 till 1991, but Shusha became kind of Belgrade garrison till May 1992. This is why symbolically the return of Shusha is more important than maybe even return of Stepanakert. I will back to this topic again, but now I can register the fact that some parts of proper Nagorno-Karabakh was lost for Armenian side. And a new reality is introduction of the peacekeepers. Previously, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was different from other ones because of absence of any peacekeeping operations, be it Russian, international, unilateral, multilateral, no matter. In the case of Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Moldova, Tajikistan, we saw peacekeeping, peace guaranteeing operations. We can estimate them in different ways. Okay, sometimes it depends on the angle of your observation, but nevertheless, it's the first experience just in this hot spot on the former USSR area. It's new reality. And this operation will be provided under the Russian auspices, which also established some questions at least. I will be back to them a little bit later. This is why we see a situation which is perceived by Azerbaijani side as a victory and Armenian side by a serious loss, having significant emotional and psychological influence. And we see crowds of the people in Yerevan and people who 2 years ago were fans of Nikol Pashinyan, who blessed him, now cried about his treason and his negative role in the Armenian statehood at all, not only in the case of concrete outbreak of the violence. What's about other factors? First of all, I suppose that this outbreak stress the growing role of external factors. Now we can see about maybe globalization of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, or at least internationalization of this conflict. First of all, we see the growing role of Turkey. Let me briefly differentiate what I mean, because many media persons, as well as scholars, experts, say about Turkey is a new actor in this conflict. It's not quite true. Turkey is not new actor, because in 1993, for the peak on the first Karabakh war, Turkey closed its land or border with Armenia. It was in 1993. This is why Turkey was engaged in blockade of Armenia together with Azerbaijan. This blockade was not officially proclaimed, but it was a part of the problem also. And this pressure was a significant factor in the foreign policy choice of Armenia and situation in the region in general. It's important. Turkey publicly supported Azerbaijan for all previous outbreaks of the violence. It was visible in 2016 in April, in July 2020, for outbreak of the conflict along the Azerbaijani-Armenian interstate border, and so on, so on. A lot of military exercises took place, and of course, phases on Karabakh, not only occupied areas, but Karabakh is occupied by Armenians, was pronounced by the Turkish politicians. But now we can see the new role of Turkey, new abilities of Turkey, because now Turkey pretends to be mediator. Turkey argues with Russia on the peacekeeping operation. Turkey blames OSCE Minsk group for complete ineffectiveness, being member of this group, by the way. Turkey is not co-chair, but member of this group. First time since the establishment of this group in March 1992, we see the contradictions within the OSCE Minsk group. And Turkey promotes idea on victory, complete victory of Azerbaijan, even more than Azerbaijani officials did. It's necessary to understand. But I consider the growing role of Turkey, new capacity of Turkey in the wider context. It's necessary also to take it into the account. Since 2003, when party of Erdogan came to power, foreign policy of this country has transformed seriously. Previously, the Turkish foreign policy could be treated like nationalistic, secular isolationist, oriented on the cooperation with United States, European Union, Israel, by the way, prior to 1979, secular Iran. But now we see, first of all, change of Turkish role as a secular country. Turkey pretends to play a role of protector of Muslims in France and Germany, not only in the Middle East. Turkey is active in the former areas of the previous Ottoman presence. Libya. Now we can discuss the problem of revenge for Tripolitan War of the early 20th century, for example. We can see the growing role of Turkey in Syria, when Turkey presents in the military format, Iraq also. And we see the rivalry between Turkey and Greece in the Aegean Sea basin. We see a lot of traces of the Turkish growing presence in Africa, not only in Libya. And in the Middle East, not only in Syria, Qatar, let's see, where Turkey opposes to many powers, United States, France, Gulf monarchies, Greece, Russia, Balkans, by the way. When Erdogan visited Sanjak, area populated by Muslims in Serbia, even Alexander Vučić, president of Serbia, cried that popularity of Erdogan is incomparable with his own popularity when he attended this area. This is why we see the growing international role of Turkey, which is not interested to be only younger brother of the United States. Turkey tries to return Russia its challenge to Syria. In 2015, Russia said, okay, now we should be active not only within the framework of the former USSR. Middle East was not part of USSR. Yes, Syria was an ally of the Soviet Union, but it was not Union Republic, autonomous region. Russia deployed its troops and demonstrated its willingness to compete. Now Turkey demonstrates the same in the southern Caucasus area crucially important for Russia, which this region borders on Russian North Caucasus, one of the most vulnerable areas of Russia and fulfilled by a lot of problems. They maybe now look like not so topical in comparison with developments of 15 or 20 years ago, but nevertheless. Role of Iran. The role of Iran looks like more passive in comparison with the Turkish one, but it doesn't mean this role is absent. For Iran, there is one point, very interesting and principle, deployment of peacekeepers. It's not coincidence that Iran for many years objected the deployment of peacekeepers in the Karabakh conflict zone because it was rather suspicious to appearance of external actors. Americans, Israelis, Brits, and so on. It's interesting that now Iran greets the deployment of Russian peacekeepers because Iran has its own image of the Caucasus. All problems of the region should be resolved on the base of regional and neighborhood communication and cooperation. Iran is in favor of 3+3 format, covering Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, should resolve any tensions properly based on their own resources, with no engagement of US, EU, and some other countries, as well as three neighboring countries, Iran, properly, Turkey, and Russia. This is why now Iran is more or less benevolent to the Russian activism, because it's within this framework 3+3. But Iran demonstrated a lot of maybe doubts and a lot of concerns about transit or transfer of the Middle Eastern instability to the South Caucasus. One issue on Turkey, which was missed by me, sorry for this, the Turkish engagement is also discussed widely in the context of proxies. Now, a lot of speculations about this topic. It will take some time to clarify in the objective scholarly way what concrete groups were borrowed from Syria to South Caucasus, their number, the degree of their influence, and so on. But this fact is discussed not only by journalists or cunning reporters violating borders for one or two images demonstrating their drive. It was discussed by representatives of intelligence community of US, France, Russia. This is why this risk exists. If we agree that scale of this penetration is not so impressive, by the way, and Iran expresses concerns about it, because Iran is not interested to see the second Syria along the northern part of its borders. And here it's interesting that we see the situation when external actors don't follow the strict lines of their integration solidarity. Turkey, as well as France and United States, are NATO members, but their positions are different. In terms of peaceful resolution, in terms of attempts to put ceasefire, Iranian position as well as Russian, maybe I can say paradoxical thing, but those positions are closer to the American and French one. It's not coincidence that President Macron, in spite of Navalny case or some other quarrels between European leaders and Russia on Belarus, on human rights, on Ukraine, calls regularly to Vladimir Putin to exchange suggestions on the Nagorno-Karabakh development. Vice versa, Russia has a lot of problems with CSTO members. Just recently, I was engaged in the discussion with some representatives of Central Asian countries, and they openly said about Turkish solidarity, in spite of their membership with CSTO. This is why Nagorno-Karabakh not discovered, but at least sharpened the problem of bloc solidarity. Nagorno-Karabakh conflict demonstrates that those old principles are not working in the full extent. And we see some paradoxical situation when on the other topics, position of countries not the same, but on the Nagorno-Karabakh, they could be similar or the same. For example, we see Minsk group, co-chaired by France, United States, and Russia. This position in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh is more or less similar, maybe the same. Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for many years was kind of unique because it was not transformed to geopolitical. In one of my articles, I introduced such explanation as the two generations of the ethno-political conflicts. The first one was born in the time of the USSR collapse. It was connected with the Soviet Union collapse, nation building in the USSR, Uti-Posidetis principle, and so on. But then all the conflicts were added by the geopolitical dimension. And now we are discussing the Russian-Georgian problem, or problem in Moldova, or problem in Kosovo, not only like conflict between Belgrade and Pristina, Tiraspol and Chisinau, Tbilisi and Sukhumi, Tskhimvali. It's also about Russia-NATO rivalry, Russia-US confrontation, Russia-EU quarrels, and so on and so on. Till 2020, Nagorno-Karabakh looked like something outside of this framework. But now we see this conflict became geopolitical. And we maybe not opened, but felt that geopolitical competition could not be not only in the format of Western Russian rivalry. Turkey, formally it's a part of the Western world, but informally no. And we see when the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has given, speaking in economic terms, added value. France is so active. Position of France in this part of the post-Soviet space maybe became unique since 1991. Previously, France demonstrated its interest only in the Ukrainian crisis or some European things, but in the Caucasus, maybe since the time of Medvedev-Sarkozy, I cannot remember this activization. It's not due to Karabakh properly. It's due to growing tensions between France and Turkey in the Mediterranean area, Libya, Syria, as well as Aegean Sea, and of course, even domestic agenda of France. Nagorno-Karabakh conflict now is treated as a part and parcel of these wider scenarios and wider contexts. We see their growing terrorist activities in France, and Turkey tried to blame Macron for his readiness to prevent radicalization. It looks like this situation, and in a couple of years, France will face presidential elections. This is why factor of Karabakh has become additional problem to criticize Erdogan and radical Islamists. We see the growing influence on Karabakh conflict on Georgia, because Georgia is in a very complicated situation. On the one side, this country borders on both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it has not a delimited border with Azerbaijan. I mean, here quarrels around David Garedji monastery complex. On the other side, we see growing dependence of Georgia from the Turkish and Azerbaijani investment and economic presence. It's so strong. On the other side, we see the two numerous communities, in Javakheti Armenian one and Kvemokartli Azerbaijani one. They are citizens of Georgia, but they have their preferences outside of this country, and problem of intercommunal communication is so important for Georgia. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was a part of the electoral campaign in Georgia, you know, where Georgian Dreams supported negotiations, and Salome Zorabishvili as well as Georgi Gakhari offered the role of Georgia as moderator, even place for a meeting of Minsk OSCE group, co-chairs, and so on. Other case is Mikhail Saakashvili, who objected it and saying, no doubts, Nagorno-Karabakh is a part of Azerbaijan, provoking some tensions between him and Armenian universities, public and NGOs. And this factor is important. And of course, Russia. For this conflict, I faced rather unprecedented reaction of the Western experts, because previously Western experts were perplexed by the Russian presence in different topics, in different areas. For example, so-called gentle people, вежливые люди in Ukraine, or отпускники, people on vacations, vacancies in Donbass, or some other paramilitaries in Abkhazia, and so on and so on. Syrian engagement also. But now my colleagues raised the question, where was Russia? Where is Russia? The dominant question for this month. Because I suppose many experts, not only in the West, in Russia also, have become hostages of the 2014 Crimean development, when Russia reacted immediately, and the support was kind of revisionist and so on. But this revisionism behavior is not universal for Russia. The Russian behavior demonstrated a variety of different approaches. Sometimes it could be revisionist, sometimes no. In the case of Armenian-Azerbaijani hostility, yes, many people stress especially that Russia had responsibility with Armenia as a lie, yes. But not only in 2020, but previously, Russia said, yes, it's about Armenia, Armenian territory. Maybe we should take care about negotiations on the status of Nagorno-Karabakh, but not occupied areas. In Russia, 2-3 different problems are estimated in various prisms and spectacles. In Armenia, in another way, there was kind of asymmetry of perceptions. The other very important problem with Azerbaijan, unlike Georgia, didn't require to be fastly recognized as NATO member. Azerbaijan didn't use its Armenia-phobia resource like anti-Russian. This is why Russia developed more or less balanced relations. Yeah, treating Armenia like ally, Azerbaijan like a partner, because Azerbaijan didn't share the same integration project with Russia. But the problem, who was opponent of your ally, was very important. Azerbaijan was not perceived like something looking like Ukraine and Georgia, countries oriented on the NATO membership, using some anti-Russian sentiments and their propaganda and so on and so on. This is why Russia tried to balance. And finally, Russia appeared, and just Russia, like in 1994, 2016, stopped the violation. We can discuss the change in configuration. We can blame Russia for this, and this, but Russia stopped this violation and began playing decisive role, deploying peacekeepers there. It was about 2,000 people. Does it mean that this issue is closed? Not. On the one side, this ceasefire agreement contradicts to the basic principles of the basic principles, updated Madrid principles, in terms of status of Karabakh, which is missed in this ceasefire agreement, or referenda in Nagorno-Karabakh, or interim status, or status at all. But we can see a lot of similar places, like attempt to divide occupied areas from Nagorno-Karabakh. It looks now like Saakashvili captured Kadori Gorge with no capture of Sukhumi, because the strategic goal of Aliyev and Erdogan, back to him, was liquidation of Nagorno-Karabakh as de facto state at all. But now we see opportunities to keep not the whole extent of Nagorno-Karabakh, but bigger part of it as de facto state. And it looks like separation of this territory from the other occupied areas. It gives a chance for return to the negotiations and to address to the second basket. The first basket, the occupation is more or less closed, but the second one is opened and suspended now. Can I see that this situation looks like paradise obtained or final resolution? Of course, no, because ceasefire agreement is not treaty, and a lot of questions are on the table and outside of the table. How Russian peacekeepers will cooperate with the monitoring center will be opened in Azerbaijan, where Turkey will be present. And we see now different interpretations of the Turkish and Russian representatives. Collision between them could be. The other set of the problem is a relationship between Azerbaijani authorities and Russia. Now Azerbaijani authorities are happy. However, even me hear a lot of voices. Those voices are rather soft, maybe, not so loud, but nevertheless, those voices are about Stepanakert or Khankindi or territory of Karabakh. And this is why we can see not the same but similar situation which appeared previously with Russia, Georgia. Georgians in 1993 were not happy, but more or less convenient with deployment of peacekeepers. But they believe that peacekeepers will ensure territorial integrity of Georgia very fast. Situation was developing in different ways. As a result, disappointment. As a result, knocking the NATO doors. and changes in the foreign policy. Can we forecast the same or similar situation with Azerbaijan-Russia relationship? Yes, of course, as one of the variants. Not absolutely predictable, but nevertheless, we should take it into the account. This is why now we don't see any final steps to resolve this conflict. It can be treated like a chance, but a lot of different variants also exist, not only positive but negative. Let's see. But finally, we see the growing internationalization, at least of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And I'm repeating again, geopolitical factor is not only about Russia and Russian-Western rivalry. Maybe this conflict will push leaders of Russia and United States, Russia and European Union to see on different things in wider sense, not restricted themselves only by nostalgia of Cold War or rhetoric of Cold War, but something changing, growing unpredictability in the current world, growing importance of non-state actors, proxies, and so on. This is why this conflict can be treated like instructive war for people who are interested to make our world more stable and predictable. Thank you so much for your attention. Now let me stop my presentation, and I'm open for your questions, comments, objections, even critical notes. Okay. One procedural point. Can I collect 3 questions? Because I know myself as a teacher, I try to make more detailed response, and this is why I can miss 2 or 3 voices who are interested to clarify this or that angle of my observation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderfully comprehensive explanation, and I think you really put it in its international and regional perspective. So I will encourage people, if you have questions, we have the Q&A function open. I see we have one question there. I would encourage the rest of you to pose your question there. So I'm going to start by just asking the first question. As you said, the status of Nagorno-Karabakh itself has not been resolved by the ceasefire. How do you think it's going to just remain a frozen conflict going forward, or do you think at some point there will be moves to try and resolve the status of that region too?
Okay, I understand your question, Angela. Can I collect 2 more questions and I will respond after? Mike.
I'm going to the Q&A. The first one, to what extent does the passage created between the southern Azerbaijani taken land and Nakhchivan pose a threat of pan-Turkism and undercuts Russia's Armenia's north-south pathway to Iran?
Okay.
And then second one, do you think that the escalation of conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh and the attempted resolution will trigger similar reopening of conflict resolution attempts between Georgia Tbilisi, Abkhazeti Sukhumi, South Ossetia, Srinvali? That's 3 questions? Is that enough?
Yeah, 3 questions. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
All of them very interesting questions and rather provocative intellectually, of course, not politically. The first question about the status. Yeah, I can repeat that the conflict prior to this year looked like 2 baskets. One of them more or less reconfigured, and yes, we can see that Armenians will treat the lost territories like something the same or similar to the loss of Kars or territories of so-called Western Armenia, maybe. But the status is not resolved, and I suppose that it's on the table. If even Russia now is not trying to provoke this discussion, some other actors already did it. Let's see on statements of France, because for France, no concrete risks For Russia, the balancing between Armenia and Azerbaijan is risky, and the swing policy can finally provoke loss of the both. This scenario is also discussed. It's also more or less understandable. It's not inevitable, I suppose, but due to some reasons. Let me briefly say that understanding the growing role and engagement of Turkey in the Caucasus and the strategic connection between Azerbaijan and Turkey, at the same time, I cannot overrate it. I know people in Azerbaijan, and I know a desire of Aliyev and Azerbaijani elite to be a self-sufficient force. They use Turkey. Their scheme tail wagging the dog is more or less visible here also. Trying to use some pan-Turkic sentiments, Islam and so on. But Aliyev is more secular in comparison with Erdogan, and Islamization of the country is not interest of Ilham Aliyev. And he understands also that penetration of different proxies also risk for him. This is why I'm sure that now, understanding that some salami principle was more or less reached, maybe Aliyev will also try not to say goodbye to Erdogan. Okay, all rhetoric on brotherhood, fraternity will be alive, but he will try to diminish a bit its dependence, because the know-how of post-Soviet Azerbaijan is to balance between Israel and Iran, Russia and United States, Turkey and some other actors. This is why I'm not sure that this idea will be completely abandoned. But the problem of status will become more acute. Okay, maybe 2, 3, even 5 years Azerbaijan will wait, say, great victory, even some areas which were no arenas of military confrontation were given to us, great. But then some politicians or younger generations can demand something. And this is why the conflict is not resolved. It's not frozen in terms of dynamics, because freezing dynamics means absence of any developments, positive or negative. It's kind of refrigerator with some goods inside, but no developments to the north, to the south, or to whatever. Yeah, and this is why this problem will establish collisions. And I'm not sure that clear interest for Russia is to make retreat. And now, following rhetoric, recent statements of Putin and Peskov, we can register the fact that Russia demonstrated its dissatisfaction with the fact of aircraft or presence of Turks on the ground, and so on and so on. This is why some collisions are possible. And in terms of a political status issue, yeah, maybe it's frozen in this part of the problem. Question on 7 districts and Nakhichevan corridor, which was not even mentioned ever in previous plans, stage by stage, or gradual, or package plan, or Kazan formula, or updated Madrid principles. Yeah, it's true. It established maybe some risks, not in terms of geographical configuration itself, but in terms of perceptions. The problem of many conflicts, not only in the post-Soviet space, it's a problem of foreign policy at all, the false perceived problems. When Mikhail Saakashvili previously perceived a rhetoric on friendship, on fraternal support as a blessing for unfreezing of the conflicts, and he was wrong. This is why now Turks can perceive the situation like final victory over Russia and start of the end of the Russian dominance in the South Caucasus, kind of a neo-Ottoman reconquista. I'm not sure it would be so good. Russia demonstrated its willingness to protect its interests only in not so friendly environment. Let's see on Syria. Environment in South Caucasus is incomparable with Russian resources in Syria, and this is why let's see on the situation. I am not sure that Vladimir Putin or Russian leaders are altruist, making retreat. in the area which physically even has great importance. Third question about precedent character of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Let me quote myself in my author's column in Kommersant, a daily well-known Russian media resource a couple of days ago. I said about it, just by the words of people who ask a question, that I wrote that this conflict demonstrated two things. First one is absence of compromise, absence of readiness to compromise, and effectiveness of revisionisms in terms of reconsidering of conflict status quo. And the other point is treating of this policy as a pattern. Yes, of course. I am so skeptical to the case of Georgia because now Russian, not peacekeepers, but militaries are protecting borders in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. In this way, it will be direct warfare. I'm not sure that every Georgian politician, I'm not sure about Saakashvili, but current government doesn't look like suicidal one, especially taking into the account 2008 event. But in the case of Ukrainian crisis, I'm not so skeptical. And I can see that here some negative moments can be realized. In this way, I am taking care on the recent meeting between Zelensky and Erdogan. You know that military-industrial cooperation between Kyiv and Ankara has grown, and Bayraktar demonstrating its effectiveness on the battlefields in Karabakh is a part of the supply deal between Kyiv and Ankara. And Vladimir Zelensky demonstrated practically the same approach as previously was demonstrated by Petro Poroshenko, that Donbass is interesting in terms of territory, not people, because people can vote not favorably for dominant political groups and so on. In the case of Transnistria, I see some risks, and actions of combatants appeared this year from time to time in the several parts of Chisinau are also provoking some concerns, because Russia has no border with Transnistria, it's blocked practically, no opened airspace on the Ukrainian territory. This is why those areas can be treated potentially like risky to reconsider the conflict. It's very important. In this way, we can also add one element to this greater puzzle, Karabakh conflict as an instructive war, I said previously.
Thank you. Now, let's have some questions about the US role. There's several. The US has played essentially no role in the current conflict. The American Armenian community wants Washington to get involved, and under Biden, now and under Biden. What can Washington do that could be helpful? Then another question, if Minsk Group co-chairs France or the US were to offer peacekeepers to reinforce Russian peacekeepers, however unlikely, could this be of interest to Russia? There was one more on the US, specifically regarding whether it's in the US interest to avoid involvement to drive a wedge between its adversaries, Iran, Turkey, Russia, or should the US play a greater role in resolving the conflict?
Okay, let me start, let me unite first of all the first and third questions. They cover not the same, but adjacent areas, the US interest and US potential role. Let me start this answer with characterizing of basic features of the US policy towards the Caucasus. This region is not crucially important. Let me quote one article written by Paul Stronsky, Gene Rumer, and Richard Sokolsky. It was a report at the Carnegie Endowment. They said that the Caucasus is important, but not crucially important, unlike Russia. Russia resolves these puzzles addressing to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. United States do the same addressing to the wider puzzles. Iran, Turkey, Russia, energy policy, collisions between interventionism and isolationism. And Nagorno-Karabakh was a part of the electoral battles, but these discussions were rather narrow. I can remember in this context quote of Biden on October 14 that Moscow attempt to put ceasefire is a challenge for the American leadership. It's necessary to be more active and no more. As for Trump, it looked like absolutely PR step. Sorry for my estimate. It looked like joke that resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is so easy. Sorry, for 26 years it was not resolved. Now Trump will do it for one electoral campaign cycle. I'm not sure. But at the same time, I can imagine the activization of the American role in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Here, I'm not sure that US will seriously oppose to Russia, not due to its admiration of the Russian peacekeeping activities and so on. I suppose it looks like maybe not challenge, but subject to think. But Russia is not considered in the context of Nagorno-Karabakh like revisionist power. Believe me, in the case when Russia will recognize Nagorno-Karabakh Republic or annex it, reaction of the United States will be different. It does not mean that United States will send troops to contain Russia, but reaction will be so different from it. Because United States take care about Eurasia, and any efforts to promote Eurasian project with no US engagement are not so welcome. And here are no differences between Turkey, Russia, or Iran. And as for Minsk OSCE group will promote some other peacekeepers, I'm not sure that idea on trilateral ceasefire statement was born with no suggestions with any partners. I don't believe it. I suppose those drafts were parts of the discussions in telephone talks between Macron and Putin or some other diplomacy, and co-chairs worked. They organized some meetings in Geneva between conflicting sides and so on and so on. This is why I don't think it's a surprise. But now Minsk OSCE group, if we can follow attentively their statements, their two co-chairs, the rest of co-chairs is not taking care about peacekeepers properly, but about problems of negotiations. They are in favor of accelerating negotiations in substance.
Okay, and here are three more questions.
Okay.
What has the reception been of Russian peacekeepers in the conflict for experts or elites in Russia? Is there a fear Russia will now be even more responsible for Armenian security if Azerbaijan attempts to retake Nagorno-Karabakh again in the future? Second question, what have been the reaction of North Caucasus peoples to the conflict? Have many taken the side with Azerbaijan on social media? Is Russia fearful of this in the long run? One now on Armenia. Pashinyan's critics have suggested that he overestimated the potential support of the West for his policies. Do you agree that this is an accurate description of Yerevan's multi-vectored foreign policy under Pashinyan? And if so, will the loss of the war lead to greater commitment by Yerevan to regional multilateralism?
Okay, as for expert estimates in Russia, they're different, by the way. we have different groups of experts and media persons. Let me differentiate experts who try to be more or less objective from lobbyists who promote one vision on the problem, both Armenian and Azerbaijani. What we can see now, the strengthening of pro-Azerbaijani sentiments in Russian media community, as well as social media. Some persons who promoted this vision became more visible in comparison with perspective of 5-10 years and so on. It's also necessary to take into the account the strengthening of work of the embassy and foreign ministry on the promoting of Azerbaijani point of view. You know that recently, maybe a month ago, in the American Conservative, there was a publishing of one article, Barbara Boran, as far as I remember, who covered the growing Azerbaijani lobbyist activity in the United States, traditional territory of the Armenian lobby domination. But now we see some groups which are promoting the American vision, like Podesta Group and some other groups. Russia maybe survives not the same but similar thing. As for criticism, yes, these critical estimates exist on the Russian necessity to be more active on the initial stage of this outbreak, not postponing it till November. This viewpoint is represented, of course, but it's a part of the expert media and scholarly discussion. My pathos is addressed now to young American scholars, experts, because among some of you, there is a conventional wisdom that in Russia there is kind of vertical of expert views. It's not quite true. Politically, Russia, of course, is far from democratic styled, but nevertheless, there is a numerous expert and media views spread in social media and traditional media also. As for the North Caucasus, first of all, I cannot restrict this reaction only by the North Caucasus communities. Muslim communities, North Caucasus community, Armenian community, different communities. Some maybe most PR active persons like Ramzan Kadyrov try to follow the balanced position. Ramzan Kadyrov, on the one side, tried to promote his image as a protector of Muslims. And he is compared very frequently with Erdogan. And he's called local Erdogan. Erdogan, like global phenomenon, Kadyrov is local one. And his rhetoric on Macron, Charlie Hebdo, or some other cases is not the same, but similar to the Turkish leader. At the same time, he addressed to the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan to stop warfare in the first hours of the war. And just yesterday, he addressed to them to follow the Russian initiative and so on and so on. I know that especially Dagestan is taken care because of the Turkish activity, because of presence of ethnic Azeris. More than 100,000 people of Azeri background live in Dagestan, and there are some problems. They are not so topical between Lezgins and Azeris in Azerbaijan, in relationship between the two ethnic groups. This is why those topics discussed. And I don't see any clear demands or statements of one-sided support. But in social media, yes, we can see some accents in the Muslim-oriented audience. Most of people were more or less positive on Azerbaijani side, criticizing Armenia and so on and so on. But at the same time, it helps us to explain the Russian balanced approach, because we also have some domestic issues, rather maybe sensitive, which are be taken to serious account. And question on Pashinyan, one of my beloved questions for last years. I cannot share the view that Nikol Pashinyan, as a prime minister, has become extremely pro-Western. He was not extremely pro-Western, respectively pro-Western in the period of his opposition activities, when he criticized the Eurasian Economic Union. As for multi-vector foreign policy, excuse me, but this term, complementarism, was raised in the time of Minister Askanyan, became foreign minister in Armenia. He worked in the period of Kocharian and then Sargsyan. In the period of Kocharian, very close friend of Vladimir Putin, this idea of complementarism was discussed. And Armenians told a lot of times that we are supported by Russia in weaponry, financially by US, and we have open border with Iran at the same time. The idea of balance is more or less typical for all small countries. Russia or United States or India, China can say, or Turkey, Iran can say, no, we are not going to be friendly to this or that power. But it's impossible in the case of Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, or some other countries. This is why they try to balance. Let's assume Kyrgyzstan, for example, far from Caucasus. This country is developing relations with US. There is a university in Central Asia. President of it is my good friend, American professor Andy Caucuses. At the same time, they have Slavonic Russian University. In the case of Pashinyan, for 2 years of his presence and power, he did nothing to change dramatically foreign policy of Armenia. He never stated about withdrawal from both CSTO and Eurasian Economic Union. He said, yes, I was against when I was opponent of the power, now I'm in power, this is why I'm in favor of Eurasian Economic Union. He attended a lot of summits. He met with Putin more frequently than Sargsyan and even Kocharian. He made some mistakes in other sphere, like not professional, not experienced politician. He was born in the atmosphere of rallies, protests, and he made a lot of promises, which is not typical for average politician. He said, for example, if my people will be against any treatment on Nagorno-Karabakh, I will resign immediately. What can we see now? Many people, maybe not all of them, but many people in Armenia are against the ceasefire statement signed by Pashinyan. And Pashinyan did not address to people on the streets, guys, what do you think about my statement with my agreement with Putin and Aliyev? He didn't provide sociological polls or referenda on this topic. He did in accordance with military needs. It's important. This is why I cannot overrate this so-called pro-Western vector. He made some mistakes in attitude to Kocharian and domestic policy in Armenia, because he did some steps to his opponent, thinking that his popularity will be kept forever. It's impossible. If you're not Stalin, of course, or Kim Jong-un. If you are Stalin, Kim Jong-un, no taking care on your popularity. You will be popular for your death. But if no, you should take care on potential revenges. I can imagine that if Pashinyan would be in power for 10 years, maybe in this way, already we will talk about new prime minister of Armenia, maybe, but he was 2 years. And one more point, very interesting in terms of domestic Armenian developments. Prior to 2020, I cannot remember serious reflection on the value of loss. Now it's discussed. And dividing lines is not between pro-Western and pro-Russian politicians. Okay, Pashinyan is pro-Western, but now Russia is interested to keep him as a leader because implementation corresponds to the Russian interest, and failure of implementation maybe will open the way to anti-Russian politicians. This is why Russia is interested. Or some persons like Arai Karutinyan, leader of non-recognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, or such person as Seyran Oganyan, former defense minister of Armenia, who said militarily we didn't oppose, militarily. This is why we see the discussion on the value of loss. When Levon Petrosyan in 1997 raised the question on the compromise, he resigned practically immediately. Now we see different views on Karabakh and districts around and so on and so on. It's kind of new reality. It's necessary to observe it more carefully, but it looks like rather new.
Okay, and here are the last three questions, and we have roughly 8 minutes. So one of them is much more about what's happening with the territory. The ceasefire seems to fall short on definitively determining the legal status of Khankendi. Are these areas still de facto independent, de jure Azerbaijan? Has the Artsakh government been fully dissolved? And what's to happen in Karabakh after 5 years if Russian peacekeepers leave? So that's one question there on the territory. And then is the Kremlin likely to see its active role in bringing about the ceasefire as showing Western de facto acceptance of Russia's privileged interests in the region? And the final one, at the end of the USSR, Nagorno-Karabakh was 76% Armenian. To what extent does the current ethnic cleansing of Armenians and the creation of 100,000 plus refugees affect the question of self-determination of Armenians of NK?
Okay, I agree that question of status is accompanied with a lot of unanswered, even unraised questions. First point, demography. As a result of new warfare, a lot of people left territory of NK. Even representatives of de facto authorities recognize the fact that 17% stayed in Stepanakert. And most of them are people of the older generations who have no money to rent apartment or buy apartment in Yerevan or some other cities in Armenia. Question of demography, very important. Return of the people who left their homes, it's possible, but they would rely on security guarantees. Question of functioning of NKR authorities. They evacuated from NK during the last days of warfare. They could return. Now I hear nothing about dissolution of the NK government, presidential administration, and so on. This is why, under the control of the Russian peacekeepers, those things are possible, as well as revitalization of this territory. But question on prolongation of the stay of Russian peacekeepers is important, because otherwise I see clear risks of some incidents, looking like Serbian Krajina. By the way, the image of Serbian Krajina is so topical for Russian authorities in practical decision making. This is why in Donetsk 2014, not from the first stages, but in September 2014, Russia intervened, as well as now Russia did a lot of steps to stop the warfare in Shusha, because otherwise some humanitarian consequences could negatively influence on their Russian reputation, not only in Armenia, but in the world. Question on Russian unilateral steps in the unilateral, but for trilateral statement, finally. Yeah, I suppose it was a demonstration of the Russian privileged role. Yes, of course, because Russia prefers to realize its goals and tasks unilaterally, not on the multilateral basis. But in the case of Minsk Group, this thing is not contradicting. In many cases, and its uniqueness of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Russia was allowed by the other co-chairs, and Russia did itself some unilateral steps, not opposing itself to the West. Russia now doesn't deny the Minsk OSCE group. Russia did not withdraw from this format, and so on, so on. This is why I suppose it's more or less considered like working playground. And question on potential ethnic cleansings. Unfortunately, it's a common problem for the whole post-Soviet space. Shared sovereignty is not so popular. Compromise is not so popular. Ethnic heterogeneity is not requested. It's a problem, like kind of existential one. I don't know what should we do. If I would know answer, I was awarded by the Nobel Prize for Peace, but it's a real problem. It's a real problem to rely only on clear force to ensure your existential survival. It's a clear problem. I hope that the Russian peacekeepers will do something to make the situation more or less positive. But politics, as you know, is an art of opportunities.
Let me thank you very much for an excellent talk. I think, again, explaining all the complexities to all of us that tuned in was quite enlightening, really. Thank you again, and we hope to have you back next year, and we'll see how events in the region develop. So I'm sure everyone else on this webinar joins me in thanking you very much.